What happens when the school bully picks on the one girl who's been training for this exact moment? It was the calm before the storm in the Lincoln High cafeteria. Outside, the sun shone warmly on a late spring Thursday as juniors and seniors counted down the final weeks before summer break. Everything looked ordinary. Clusters of friends chatting, trays clattering against formica tables, the aroma of pizza and tater tots hanging in the air like familiar ghosts. But for 16-year-old Zoe Jackson, lunch hour was anything but routine. Zoe slipped her earbuds into one pocket of her faded denim jacket. In the other, she held a well-worn copy of Kindred, its red cover scuffed from months of backpack rides. She was lean and tall, with tightly coiled hair pulled into a high ponytail that swayed behind her like a banner. To most students, she was that quiet girl by the window. But Zoe's silence was deliberate. She was always observing. She had noticed how the cafeteria's long tables acted like territory markers, how certain groups, athletes, theater kids, band members, claimed the prime spots near the windows or beneath the air vents. She had cataloged every slight, every whispered insult, and she had trained for moments just like this. Zoe rounded the far corner, passing the pizza line where the lunch lady nodded at her. She glanced at her usual window seat, only to find it occupied by two boys from the basketball team, their laughter booming as they tossed fries at each other. No surprise there. Adjusting her backpack straps, she scanned for an open space, her heart steady. That's when she saw it, a half-empty table near the center, its lone occupant, a tall, blonde senior, slouched over his tray, the kind of posture that screamed, "Do not disturb." His name was Ethan Walker, star quarterback, gym rat, and worst of all, notorious bully. Everyone knew Ethan. He walked the halls like he owned them. Zoe met his gaze as she stopped in front of the table, the silence between them electric. She nodded politely. "Mind if I sit here?" Her voice was calm but carried across the table, cutting through the cafeteria chatter. Ethan barely glanced up. He smirked as if amused that anyone dared address him. "You? Here?" His tone was flat, as though he couldn't believe a nobody was speaking to him. Zoe didn't flinch. She lifted her book and slid it onto the bench beside her. "Just the seat," she said, voice steady. "You can keep your tray." That's when things shifted. Ethan leaned back, exhaling theatrically, as if her request was a personal affront. His two friends at the end of the table snickered under their breaths. Another boy whispered to a friend, "Watch this." But Zoe ignored the whispers, unfolded her jacket, and opened her book as though she hadn't just challenged the cafeteria kingpin. 5 minutes ticked by. Zoe read, occasionally glancing up when someone walked past. Ethan tried to get her attention, nudging his friend, loud sighs, raking his fingers through his hair as if to say, "Are you paying attention?" But Zoe didn't look up. 10 minutes passed and his annoyance grew more obvious. The smug grin vanished, replaced by a frown. He jabbed his elbow into the table to get her to react, but she didn't blink. Finally, Ethan pushed his tray aside with a sharp push. Half his lunch slid across the floor. The cafeteria fell into a hush. A few mouths opened in surprise. Zoe closed her book, eyes meeting his. "Please stop pushing," she said softly. He scoffed, leaned forward, and with more force than necessary, slapped the table beside her. His hand smacked the laminate so hard it rattled on its legs. The entire room shuddered. Students turned cameras toward them. That was the moment Zoe had been waiting for. Years of self-defense classes, judo throws, wrist escapes, Krav Maga drills, came flooding back. In an instant that stretched into slow motion, Zoe shifted her weight onto her back foot, pivoted her torso, and used the momentum of his strike against him. Her left hand caught his wrist, her right pressed behind his elbow. With a swift rotation, she off-balanced him and guided his body so he landed chest first on the cafeteria floor. The thud echoed louder than the initial slap. For 10 seconds, the room was silent. Then cameras clicked. Gasps rang out, and a ripple of surprised laughter mixed with cheers. Ethan lay there, stunned and red-faced, clutching his shoulder as Zoe rose gracefully, brushing imaginary crumbs from her jeans. She didn't shout, didn't show anger, just closed her book with deliberate calm and started walking toward the exit, as if her actions were the most natural thing in the world. Those 10 seconds had upended the cafeteria hierarchy and written a new narrative on respect. Back at her backpack, Zoe flipped her ponytail over one shoulder, slipped the book inside, and reseated herself on a nearby bench away from the crush. Around her, students clustered in small groups, replaying the video on their phones, murmuring about her skill and composure. Some faces reflected admiration, others disbelief. Through it all, Zoe never broke her calm. By the time lunch ended, the clip, 10 seconds of Zoe's quiet power, had gone viral within the school. It was more than a fight. It was proof that silence isn't weakness and preparation meets opportunity. Zoe Jackson had laid hands on the wrong bully, and everyone witnessed his regret. As the final bell rang, the once quiet cafeteria hummed with new energy. Zoe Jackson walked toward her locker, her posture calm and purposeful. I have to admit, I always find it fascinating how one bold act can unravel weeks, even months of unchallenged arrogance. That day, every student who had ever laughed at Zoe now watched her with curiosity. By the time she reached the hallway, clusters had formed around glowing phone screens. Juniors gossiped about her flawless Krav Maga throw, while seniors speculated whether she'd been on a reality show training montage. Honestly, I think they underestimated her, not because she wasn't capable, but because they wanted to believe bullies never face consequences. Zoe caught sight of Ethan Walker leaning against his locker, his back rigid. He wasn't alone. Two bigger football players flanked him, arms crossed as if to shield their captain from humiliation. A knot of dread tightened in her chest, not fear, but a weight of responsibility. She paused in front of her own locker, feeling the cool metal under her palm. "Hey," called a voice behind her. It was Marcus Lee, the student council president, known for his diplomacy. He slipped out from the crowd, gently placing a hand on her shoulder. "That was incredible. Are you okay?" Zoe tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "I'm fine," she said, though her voice carried a hint of exhaustion. "It's just lunch." Marcus smiled. "To me, it's more than that. You stood up for yourself when no one else would." He gestured toward the thinning circle of spectators. "People will have a lot to say." He wasn't kidding. As Zoe passed, whispers trailed her like butterflies, admiration mixed with envy. Part of me wonders how long it will take for them to realize that real strength isn't about falling someone with one punch, but choosing not to fall into their traps. Zoe felt that too, which is why she hadn't thrown a single strike, only a precise throw that spoke volumes. By third period, rumors had spread into every classroom. In English Lit, Miss Harvey began the lesson by saying, "Before we analyze Hamlet, I want to address what happened in the cafeteria." I'm proud of how Zoe handled herself. The class erupted in applause before they could stop themselves. Miss Harvey raised a hand. "Quiet, please. Let's focus on literature. But keep in mind the courage that often underlies the stories we read." Personally, I think connecting Zoe's real-life courage to literary themes was a clever move. It reminded everyone that fiction and reality share lessons in bravery. Yet not everyone was celebrating. During lunch break in the courtyard, Zoe found Bryce Walker waiting under the old oak tree. He looked smaller, more human without the locker room entourage. His football jersey was crumpled, his hair mussed. A part of me wonders, does he realize his pride was never truly in his strength, but in others' fear of it? He stepped forward. "Jackson," he said, voice low. His chin quivered. "I have to admit, I didn't see this coming. Bullies don't typically apologize." Zoe's heart thumped, but she stood firm. "Walker." For a moment, they just looked at each other, two halves of the same coin, one shaped by silence and discipline, the other by entitlement and aggression. Finally, Bryce cleared his throat. "I owe you an apology." His gaze dropped. "I was wrong. I thought I could intimidate anyone. But you didn't just fight back. You made me look small." Zoe pressed her lips together. She knew better than to let pride rush in. "I'm glad you see that." Her tone was neutral, but I sense a subtle warmth. She respected his attempt, however awkward. He shifted uncomfortably. "Look, I know I won't erase what happened, but I want to learn how you did that move." He extended a hand, not for a handshake, but as if seeking a truce. Zoe studied him. His shoulders slumped, his expression earnest. "Martial arts," she said, surprising herself by nodding. "I train after school at the Y. Instructor's name is Coach Ramirez." Bryce hesitated. I find this exchange fascinating. The former bully now seeking guidance from the girl he once tormented. "Maybe I could join?" A hush fell over the courtyard as nearby students froze mid-bite of their sandwiches. Zoe took a breath. "It's open to anyone." She pointed to the flyer taped on the bulletin board near the gym entrance. "Self-defense class for teens, Tuesdays and Thursdays, 4:30 to 6 p.m. Be there by 4:15. He nodded. "Thank you." Then he turned and walked away, each step quieter than his usual swagger. I can't help but wonder if this marks the beginning of something real, like transformation born from humility. The rest of Zoe's day passed in a blur of classes and nods from classmates. By evening, she made her way to the community center. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as she stepped onto the mat, bowing to Coach Ramirez and the few other students warming up. 10 minutes later, Bryce Walker slipped in, stiff and self-conscious. To her surprise, Coach greeted him with a friendly nod. "Welcome, Bryce," Coach said. "I heard you were ready to learn." His tone carried no judgment, just a mentor's patience. Zoe felt a flicker of pride at having facilitated this change. As they partnered up, Zoe gave Bryce a quick rundown. How to break his stance, how to transfer energy, how to stay calm under pressure. I think this moment underscores a deeper truth. Empathy can be as powerful as any hold or throw. When Bryce misaligned his balance, Zoe quietly adjusted his foot position, her fingers grazing his ankle. He glanced at her in surprise, realization dawning that she wasn't merely teaching technique, she was offering respect. After an hour of drills, break falls, wrist escapes, controlled holds, they bowed out, sweat damp on their foreheads. Bryce patted Zoe on the back, genuine this time. "Thanks," he said simply. No bravado. Walking home that night, Zoe reflected on how everything had changed in 24 hours. The cafeteria encounter had shifted dynamics. Bullies reconsidered their targets, victims gained confidence, and even the most hardened skeptics reconsidered the meaning of strength. From a storytelling perspective, I find it compelling that a single moment can ripple outward, altering perceptions and forging unlikely alliances. At home, Zoe tucked her notebook into her backpack and turned off the lights. As she lay in bed, she thought of her mother's advice. True power comes from knowing your worth and standing by it, no matter the cost. She closed her eyes, content in the knowledge that she had lived those words, and that in doing so, she may have inspired others to find their courage too. Morning at Lincoln High felt different. The usual clamor of lockers slamming and sneakers squeaking was undercut by a hum of excitement. Zoe Jackson stepped onto campus, her heart light as she spotted small posters in the hall. "Be like Zoe, stand up for yourself, and who you are matters." Even the school walls seemed to pulse with newfound energy. That afternoon, during advisory period, Principal Morgan made a special announcement. Students gathered in the auditorium, murmuring. Zoe sat beside Marcus Lee and Renee Patel, who had watched the viral cafeteria clip over 70 times. When Principal Morgan took the stage, the room fell silent. "Today," she began, voice steady, "we recognize an act of courage that reminded us what respect truly means." She clicked a remote, and the 10-second clip played on the big screen. Zoe's calm pivot, Ethan Walker's astonished fall, the hush that followed. When it ended, the hall exploded in applause. Zoe felt her cheeks warm, but stayed composed, her gaze drifting to Ethan in the front row. His shoulders were hunched. He didn't join the applause. Instead, he looked at her with what seemed like regret and respect entwined. "I'm proud to present Zoe Jackson with the Lincoln High Courage Award," Principal Morgan continued, stepping forward with a certificate framed in oak. "Zoe, please join me on stage." Zoe rose, heart pounding, and accepted the award. As the crowd stood, a slow, genuine round of cheers washed over her. I can't help but marvel at how a moment of poised self-defense can transform a community spirit. Zoe raised the certificate above her head, not as a trophy, but as a symbol, proof that dignity and strength travel hand in hand. When she returned to her seat, Ethan stood as well. He approached quietly, his footsteps deliberate. I find it striking how humility can grow from the soil of embarrassment. He offered a small nod, which Zoe returned. No words passed between them, silence more eloquent than apologies. After school, the wise Matt was busy. Zoe arrived first, followed by an unexpected trio, Ethan Walker, two of his football teammates, and Coach Ramirez greeting them with professional warmth. Zoe took her place on the edge of the mat, grateful that her decision in Chapter 2 to invite him had borne fruit. They warmed up together, Ethan tripping over his shoelaces at first, sweat beading on his brow. Zoe coached him through stance and balance, echoing her belief that anyone can change when given a chance. His teammates watched with curiosity, then hesitance, until they too joined the drills. By the end of practice, laughter replaced tension. Bruised egos had softened into camaraderie. Walking home that evening, Zoe's phone buzzed with messages from friends, family, and even students she barely knew, thanking her for inspiring them. One message stood out. Her little brother Devin wrote, "I watched you on Instagram. Proud sis." Reading that, Zoe felt a swell of love, knowing her courage had reached beyond school walls, touching family and community. The next day, social media was abuzz with the hashtag #StandWithZoe. Local news outlets picked up the story, a viral clip of a high school girl's disciplined response redefining bullying. Interviews showed teachers, parents, and students reflecting on how they'd overlooked subtle forms of intimidation. I believe this ripple effect encapsulates the power of one individual's integrity, how a single act can spark collective introspection. Meanwhile, Ethan posted a public apology video, his shoulders squared but his eyes sincere. "I was wrong. I let fear of looking weak make me hurt someone stronger than I realized. Zoe, thank you for teaching me respect." The comments flooded in, many praising his honesty, some offering forgiveness, others calling for accountability. A week later, the student council convened to propose a new anti-bullying initiative, inspired by Zoe's example. Marcus Lee led the discussion. Peer-led workshops, conflict resolution clubs, and expanded self-defense classes. When Zoe and Ethan entered the meeting, their appearance together drew spontaneous applause. Their shared presence symbolized reconciliation, proof that even those cast in adversarial roles can find common ground. That afternoon, standing in the newly painted Respect Zone hallway, adorned with student-created murals celebrating diversity, Zoe reflected on how far she'd come. She remembered the timid freshman who first walked these halls, eyes lowered, avoiding confrontation. Now she was someone people looked to for guidance. I can't help but feel proud of her transformation, echoing the truth that growth often blossoms from the seeds of challenge. As the school day closed, Zoe headed to her locker. She found a note taped there. "Thank you for standing up, for yourself and all of us. You're our hero." She smiled, tucking the note into her jacket pocket. In that moment, Zoe understood that her actions mattered not just for the fall they sparked, but for the respect they fostered. That evening, the entire family gathered in the living room. Her mother, Camille, placed a hand on Zoe's shoulder. "You showed them who you are," she said quietly, "and reminded all of us who we can be." Zoe hugged her mother tightly, feeling the warmth of unconditional support. Her brother Devin jumped onto the couch, beaming. "That award, can we hang it in the living room?" He laughed, but his eyes shone with admiration. Later, alone in her room, Zoe looked at the framed certificate on her desk. She took a deep breath, heart full of gratitude and purpose. The next day she would return to school, not as the quiet girl by the window, but as a catalyst for change. Someone who, in 10 seconds, had shown that true power belongs to those who stand with integrity and compassion. In those 10 seconds, Zoe Jackson didn't just lay a bully on the floor. She lifted an entire community to its better self, proving that when you stand for who you are, you change the world around you.